I thy guide will lead thee hence through an eternal space, where thou shalt hear despairing shrieks, and see spirits of old tormented, who invoke a second death. What? I thought this was a comedy. No wonder people in the ancient world died young. I would too if this is what I read for a laugh. I mean, what the hell? Get it? 'Cause of Inferno? Tough crowd. It's actually called a comedy because it has a happy ending, something that people who use it for their understanding of hell tend to forget. Dante went on record saying the story was an allegory and that there were several levels of interpretation. Until very recently, it was widely understood that stories, even holy ones, had multiple meanings, and that the only way the reader could be influenced by the text was to move beyond the surface and sink into the deeper esoteric waters of revelation. One example of this is the type of biblical exegesis called the Pardes, an acronym formed from the 4 levels of interpretation, starting from the literal and ending with the hidden. The word means garden because when done correctly, the reader finds themselves back in Eden. The backbone of every story on earth is the fall and restoration of paradise, and the Divine Comedy is no exception. The literal story finds Dante lost in a dark forest, unable to find his way. The mystery sets a good hook, and we're compelled to keep reading to find out what's going on. For any writers out there, remember, the only question we want readers asking is what happens next. The story continues as Dante looks up from his fearful valley to see the sun shining on a hilltop and begins to climb toward the light. This not only foreshadows the entire point of the poem, but connects the reader back to the oldest story ever recorded. It isn't really the oldest story, just the oldest we can remember. The hill represents every mountain you have ever seen in literature, including ones found in holy books. Again, there's only one story. Dante's ascension is hindered by a few beasts, and he has to be rescued by a ghost named Virgil, who convinces Dante to follow him to hell and purgatory in order to eventually find salvation in paradise. For some reason, Dante agrees. Those must have been some scary beasts. In real life, Virgil was a Roman poet, and his character represents the masculine energy of logic and intellect. We find out later that he was asked to help Dante by Beatrice, who also really existed, and whose character represents beauty, love, and the grace of feminine intuition. On the surface, the rest of the story is Dante's journey through the horrors of hell and purgatory. It's interesting how their descriptions have become the standard for the collective consciousness of the Western world, despite the fact they don't come from the Bible. It's also important to note that Virgil is only able to lead Dante halfway. Only Beatrice can guide him to paradise. Before she does, Virgil and Dante come across one of the most iconic and memorable parts of the poem, the gates of hell. Everyone remembers the famous warning to abandon all hope, but what many have failed to grasp is that this isn't a statement of despair, but instructions on how to leave. Let me explain. Every culture on Earth has stories of heroes descending and returning from hell, including this one. The point of the message isn't that you can't leave, otherwise it would have been the end of the poem. The issue is hope. Hope is the enemy of every hero. We've all been programmed to see hope as a virtue, but all it does is keep us powerless in the present as we wish for someone to save us in the future. The ordinary world and story is full of people desperately clinging to hope, which is the very thing that keeps them disempowered. The hero, on the other hand, abandons hope and learns, if it's gonna be, it's up to me. They go from being effect to cause. This is true in story because it's true in us. People forget that hope comes from Pandora's box, something humans were never meant to open. Another iconic part of the poem is when Dante crosses the river Styx. Like the gate, the river serves as an example of border symbolism, as the hero moves from one state of understanding to another. Remember, there is no external journey in the story. All camera and location changes are just outer manifestations as the hero turns within. The only journey is into the subconscious. But since it would be boring to watch a person sitting and thinking for 2 hours, we created images to keep us entertained. In story, the descent into the subconscious, or hell, happens when the hero goes into the mysterious Darklands. This can be anything from space, water, Mordor, even the big city. This is where the hero faces their wound and rediscovers wholeness. The higher self is what waits on top of the mountain, and is represented in the Bible every time Elijah or Jesus go into the upper room. All of this comes from the solar cycle, which leads us back to the cosmic hunt. Before the sacred feminine was demonized, story came from the lunar cycle, but that's a lesson for another time. Border symbolism can be anything from a doorway or street to the river Frodo crosses to reach Rivendell. See how Arwen has Frodo? That's important. You see, in story, women represent wisdom. It's where the idea that a hero has to rescue a princess comes from. The hero's journey is really sexist. It's why Neo is asleep at the beginning of every Matrix film, and why Trinity is in danger. Wisdom is rare, and always under threat of disappearing. Without saving it, it's impossible to be a hero. You could write a movie about 3 women sipping tea, and it would still be a story about rescuing a princess. Anything else is propaganda.
And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to Ex-Women.
This is why Virgil can't lead Dante to heaven. The logic and intellect of the masculine mind is extremely valuable, and it's impossible to navigate hell without them. But it takes the feminine mind of Beatrice to reach paradise. Beware anyone trying to create division through victimization or an us versus them mentality. It is only through the sacred marriage of logic and intuition that we produce wisdom. The joining of the masculine literal and feminine sod is the only way to restore Eden. Simply thinking that memorization and regurgitation of a fact or holy book brings salvation is the very thing that put wisdom in danger to begin with. Simply put, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. This is why Frodo has to leave his skillful companions. Only the love of Sam, another Beatrice, can get him up the mountain. You'll find this everywhere, even movies about chess. In Searching for Bobby Fischer, the main character has 2 teachers, and their different styles put them at odds. The one played by Ben Kingsley wants the hero to have a more logical approach, and his teaching involved the memorization and study of order and tactics. Lawrence Fishburne's character takes a more reckless approach, instructing the hero to bring out his queen early in a more intuitive and emotional style.
Don't do it, Josh. Don't even think about it.
Bring her out.
Keep her back.
Bring her out, Josh.
The hero can't become a champion until he incorporates both. Neo can't become the one until he finds Trinity.
Now get up.
It's gonna take both Virgil and Beatrice to get you up the mountain, but that first step always leads to hell. There's only one story. There's only one person in that story, and that person is you.